Many people didn't realize how spiritual he really was.
He was searching for God. He was searching for meaning in his life.
I know that he was always looking for the avenue that he could really fulfill himself with, and there was a great void in him that way, and he felt very alone that way.
As spiritual as he wasn't strong enough. I don't think any human being beside Jesus Christ could be strong enough to abstain from all of these things happening to Elvis.
I read comic books and I was the hero of the comic book. I saw movies and I was the hero in the movie. So every dream that I ever dreamed has come true 100 times.
You know, there was a war for his soul, the light and the dark. And, you know, I mean, he was I think he was on the verge of really finding some answers. So there was a spiritual war going on for his soul.
Elvis Presley. It is a name that conjures up many images. The greasy-haired young rocker who left girls in an ecstatic frenzy. The black, leather-clad king of rock and roll, pouring his heart into his music.
I'm like a Mississippi bullfrog sitting on a hollow stump.
Cars, women, Graceland, planes, and all manner of excess are associated with his name. But what many people don't realize is that there was a quieter side to the 20th century's most potent cultural icon. A side that reflected on what it meant to actually be Elvis Presley, the man, the husband, the father and son.
Everybody talks about Elvis and rock and roll, or Elvis and sex, or Elvis and drugs, but there was a side to Elvis that is the side that I know, which was the loving, nurturing, very strong, wonderful side of Elvis, and a very spiritual side.
He said, you know, I've always felt my whole life, since I was a little boy, there's almost like an unseen hand behind me, guiding my life. He said, look, I survived at birth. I had a stillborn twin brother. Why was I chosen to live and not him? And then all of a sudden my career took off overnight, 1956. And I achieved things I never even dreamt of. Why was I chosen? Why was I plucked out of all the millions and millions of lives to be Elvis Presley and have this extraordinary life and career? There must be a reason for it. It's no accident.
Elvis Presley.
Although Elvis would forever be linked with the rock and roll music he made so successful in the 1950s, his musical roots stretch back much farther than the rhythm and blues that were the foundation of his rockabilly sound.
I was blown away with the fact that here's a man to this day that's never won a Grammy for rock and roll. The only Grammys he picked up were in the gospel area.
He was extremely religious. Not religious in a mass, you know, not overbearing where he was trying to beat you into believing what he believed, but he loved spiritual music, and he is said to me on a couple of occasions, he said, this is what got me started.
Elvis loved gospel more than any other kind of music, and it was part of his childhood.
But Elvis's love for gospel music and its soulful sound went much deeper than just his musical tastes.
Elvis had a supernatural something to him. He was very spiritual. He was connected to the spirit. And a lot of people don't know this, and Colonel didn't want that to be out there because it would have made him appear to be a little bit sort of like wiggy. All of us that believe in spirit understand each other, and Elvis was right there. He wanted to have that knowledge. He wanted to go to other places.
That was always a mystery to Elvis, and it always bothered him tremendously why he was picked to be this major star of the world and idolized by millions and have all this talent. And he was always searching, trying to figure out why. I mean, he thought he was reincarnated because he felt he lived in the past, in the Roman days. That was one of his things. He was always searching all the time. Why me, Lord? Why me, God? Why was I picked to be this person?
There's a lot of people that could have done Elvis's hair. Fortunately, that's what I did, and that was the basis of our relationship. I did his hair, behind the scenes, we were friends. I sprayed his hair, and I said, Elvis, what do you think? Do you like it? And he goes, oh, yeah, man, great. And he swung around in a chair. He said, but I want to ask you a question. What are you really all about? What are you really into? I thought to myself, wow, that's pretty straightforward. And I said, Elvis, look, you know, obviously I do a lot of celebrities, as you know. This is what I do for a living. But what interests me more than anything else is my search for God, for truth. I read spiritual books and I meditate. I'm into health foods. Look, I know you're the biggest star in the world and it might sound corny to you. And he said, no, wait a minute, Larry. Wait a minute. Not to me. That's not corny at all. Please, man, just keep on talking. You'd be surprised how I need to hear what you have to say.
Oh, he knew the Bible from cover to cover. He could quote scripture. He was a very spiritual man. He loved God.
He had a lot of Bibles that he read, and he was always searching and searching. But I thought it was just really interesting to see somebody literally wear the pages out on a Bible.
So whatever spiritual bent he was on, it wasn't a born-again thing at all. It was above that. It was a God thing. He had a relationship with God, and he could express that relationship with God through his music.
He started talking to me about how spiritual he was and how he became that way and how he was always looking for other things in life and how there were so many other things that were more important than the money, than the entertaining. He said, but through this, he goes, I can touch people and I know that I can make a difference. He said, but to use it, just to use it for that one thing, he said, is lost. And this is what really impressed me about him. And you know, anything else anybody talks about as far as him being overweight or anything else was absolutely inconsequential. You know, the man was an incredible person.
Early on in Elvis's career, it was evident that this was no ordinary celebrity. His values dictated his responses to everything from rock and roll to the controversy his performances generated. When a writer named Herb Rowe referred to Presley's fans as idiots in his column, Elvis responded not to the criticism of himself, but to the attack on his audience. When Rowe's column became a little more graphic in its critique, once again Elvis responded in a way that would be out of character with almost any other rock and roll idol.
Back to the quotation, we're no prudes, but we might suggest a gift and genuflecting to Elvis Presley. A solid slap across the mouth. Row means a slap across the mouth to these girls. Have you any comment to that?
Yeah, but I don't think I should say it, you know, because I'm a singer, not a fighter.
The beat of his heart was just like the rhythm that was in his soul for people. Elvis loved people, but Elvis knew exactly how far he could take himself with someone and not impose on that person, or he would find their personality out and then have more darn fun with them. You were with one of the most honest, sweetest, decent, funniest, generous human beings that had been through a lot as a child that could have caused him to go exactly the opposite. It didn't. Elvis, to me, is a champion in every way that a human being can be a champion.
It's a tough thing. It's tough to be, to maintain a real sane life, forget the entertainment side, but when you're elevated on a pedestal, and you know, it's hard. It's amazing that he held out for so long. You know, he wasn't an educated man, but he certainly was street smart and had a very decent heart, very decent heart. Condemned to be honest, I think.
This is part of the appeal in a way, too. There's a lot of sadness in Elvis's story. I mean, there's a lot about the human condition. You know, everybody has great triumphs and great failures, and Elvis had his share of both, and that's part of his appeal.
Charisma is God shining through man, you know. I like that Elvis say. That's a good one, boy. You don't know what your future is going to be. You're either blessed or you're cursed. There's no fortunate, there's no luck involved, there's no nothing. You're either blessed or you're cursed.
The first glimpse that the public would have into this side of Elvis Presley came on the Ed Sullivan Show, when he insisted on singing a number that most people would not associate with a rock and roll rebel.
On the first show, as I remember, he wanted to do Peace in the Valley, and the CBS official said, no way are we going to do a religious number. He said, I have promised my mother that I would do Peace in the Valley, and I'm going to sing it. And we did.
His relationship with his beloved mother would influence more than just his choice of music. Her values were a roadmap to his life.
Elvis made me nervous before I met him, because, I mean, you know, you're buying the aura, you're buying all of the appearances on Milton Berle and Steve Allen and the Tommy and Jimmy Dorsey show and Ed Sullivan. But he turned out to be, you know, completely opposite to what I had expected. He wasn't wrapped up in himself. He was a down-to-earth gentleman. The guy that called me sir when I'm 2 years younger. He said, well, that's how my mama brought me up, you know.
He was very humble, nice, and I think that's what come from his mother's part, because he was just like her, and the fact that he was so considerate, and he was such a giving young man, and so polite.
When I met Elvis and was around him a lot and got to know him, had I a son, I would love for him to have been like Elvis. Not necessarily the music and the adulation and the tremendous wealth that he brought in, but as a person, I just thought Elvis was he was so well-mannered and so polite. I never heard him call anybody other than Mr., Miss, Mrs. Norman Torog, the director, did 5 or 6 pictures with him. He still called him Mr. Torog.
Due to his success as an entertainer, Elvis was able to indulge yet another side of his nature, one that would become almost as legendary as the man behind it.
You know, Elvis' religious beliefs and generosity could have been together in some way or another. He loved to help people, and I think he felt that religion helps people too. And he loved to make people happy, and since he could afford to do that, that's what he liked to do. He liked to see people's reactions, and they gave him something that they could never afford themselves.
He was very generous with the material wealth that he had. He gave away a lot of it, not necessarily in the form of cash, but if someone needed something, he gave it to them.
I know one night I went in and he said, do you have a microwave? I said, well, I don't know if I have a microwave for it. He said, well, Miss Cox, you work all day and you come out here and you take care of me at night, and I know you have to cook for your family. And I thought maybe you might need a microwave. He said some nurse had told him that she needed a microwave because it would make her life easier with cooking supper at night. And I said, no, I don't need a microwave. I said, I got one, I don't use it.
To a fault. Elvis was generous to a fault, I think. He gave away most of his fortune, you know, when he was alive. He rewarded you because it made him feel good.
Don't admire anything, and don't say you'd like that, because the next day it would show up in your office or wherever it was.
If my mother said, gee, Elvis, that's a nice lamp, he'd say, you want it? Take it. I don't need your lamp. Well, do you want the car? Take it. He always was very generous, and when he was in Vegas, everything was on the house, from our room to our food. I could go into the gift shop and sign things. It was amazing.
There's many, many stories, and I saw him give things away that were just mind-boggling. to strangers. I remember one night he was on the stage, and he was taking his final bows, and I was on the stage with him, acting as security. And all of a sudden he paused, and people are just going berserk and screaming. People are trying to jump on the stage, and we're holding them back. Elvis goes like this, and he takes off a black diamond ring that was worth $40,000. And he went like that, he flung it, and turned around and exited the stage before the ring even came down. So we got back to his room, and someone said, "Elvis, what the hell are you doing? You just threw away a $40,000 diamond ring, man. Why?" Elvis said, "I'll tell you why. Because I listened to that voice within me, that still small voice. I just knew it. I just knew someone was in trouble. They needed that ring much more than I do. I can buy a ring like that every day of my life. But there's someone out there that had nothing that needed it. That's why I did it."
Maybe get a few things. If I liked him, get him, get him. Get some more. Get some more. A little, that's not enough, little. You know. Yeah, he was very generous to a fault, I think.
And he said to me, "Come on, I got a surprise for everyone." We walked outside into the car compound. There was a truck with 12 brand new motorcycles, Harley Davidsons. The big one, the big hogs. 6 blue, 6 red. And Elvis said to all the guys, "Everyone, pick out a bike that you want." So all of us picked out a bike. Outside the gates there were tons of fans. And there's this one kid, he must have been maybe 16 years old. And he was leaning against the fence and he was looking. And Elvis motioned to me to follow him. We walked over to this kid. And the kid went into shock by the mere fact that Elvis walked up to him. Elvis said, "Those are nice bikes, aren't they?" The kid stuttered, yeah, Elvis, yeah, real nice." And Elvis said, "Do you have a bike?" The kid said, "No, I don't have a bike." Elvis said, "Would you like to have a bike?" He said, "Yeah, well," and he stumbled. Elvis, "Go pick yourself out a bike, I want you to have one." And the kid just froze. And I said, "No, man, come on in, pick yourself out a bike. One of them is for you, I want you to have it." The kid went in, got a brand new bike. And Elvis and I walked away. Elvis said to me, "Man, I remember when I was his age, I was lucky enough to have a pair of shoes." When I saw that look in his eyes, I just had to give to him. He said, "You know, it says in the Bible, it's more blessed to give than to receive." I know exactly what that means. The joy I get from giving and to seeing the look on people's faces is worth everything.
But it wasn't just material goods that Elvis shared. He felt his wealth could be used to do some good for the people in his life.
I remember very well an instance where there was a child at one of the hospitals that was in a service ward, and they didn't allow the parents to stay at night. They could visit during the day, but not at night because it was a ward. And the child was real sick. And he had that child moved to a private room, which he paid for, so that mother could stay. And he made sure that mother had money to eat on and the necessities that she needed for herself.
He said, "But do you ever need a friend?" He said, "I'm here. I want you to know I'm here.
And I'm not here just for you to look at."
No.
He said, "You're my friend, and I want to be your friend." When my mother passed away, that we didn't know what to do because we had no money.
It was the Labor Day weekend.
Labor
It was
Day weekend,
September
no
the
way
5th.
of getting it.
In 1965, this is in 1965, we didn't know what to do. My father was devastated, and it was Elvis. We went up to Elvis, and I think we got there about 3 o'clock in the morning. He said, "Honey," he said, "go on the phone and tell your daddy not to worry about nothing, that we'll be down. You know, don't worry about anything." Pauline went down and called my dad, and meanwhile Elvis is just, hugging us and telling us not to worry, and it was so devastating.
They started making arrangements, and they couldn't get us on a plane that could take my mother's body from London Heathrow to Manchester, which is where we would have to go. And he called Elvis, and Elvis said, If you can't get a plane, you charter one.
But anyway, Elvis took us out to the car, and of course he had his arms around us, and we got in the car, and that man lay at our feet inside the car. And he said, honeys, he said, I'd come with you. He said, but it'd be a circus.
Yeah.
It'd be a circus. He said, you don't want me to come with you.
Meeting Elvis affected my life in many ways. In fact, it changed my life. It all started in 1955. My uncle booked Elvis for an appearance at the Eagles Hall in Houston in 1955. When 1970 rolled around, my father took me backstage and got through Colonel Parker and his friends at the Houston Rodeo, and I met him. He remembered my dad. A year after I met Elvis, my parents and my sister were killed. They were hit by a train as they were crossing the tracks. I was 10 years old. My grandmother contacted Elvis, and he was very upset about it upon learning about the news. And he sent me a condolence card. And my grandmother said, well, you need to write him and thank him, so I did. And it started a 7-year correspondence with Elvis. He sent me records and photographs, posters, etc. When I was 15 years old, I finally got up to Graceland. I remember that Elvis was standing outside, and he used to have his foot on a stump to sign autographs, and that's how I remember seeing him. And I called out to Elvis, and he said, oh, wait a minute. And he said, he told everybody, he said, I'll be right back, and Elvis showed me around Graceland and so forth. Elvis was a caring person. He lost his mom, and upon hearing about me losing my mom and my dad and my sister, I think he related to me, and me being so young, he would go back to that time. And in fact, he spoke to me a little bit about his mom, and I told him about my parents. He had a keen interest. He was very interested, and he wanted to know. And he had a good heart.
I believe that that's part of the strength of Elvis is his faith and his belief spiritually. That's what attracts a lot of people to him. People can talk about it, the swiveling hips or his wonderful voice and then the sexual attraction he had, but the biggest attraction of Elvis, in my estimation, was his spiritual strength and his faith and his being plugged into the power source, so to speak, plugged into God. And people are always attracted to that tremendous energy.
After my parents' death, I had a nervous breakdown, and I had developed a kidney disease and, glomerulonephritis. They told me I was going to die. I picked out my own coffin and made my own funeral arrangements and so forth. I was 16. And Elvis said, you're not going to die. And what he did is he put his hand over my back where my kidneys would be, and he prayed for me. I swear. 3 days later, I went into remission. I was at I went to the Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, and the doctor said, you're in full remission. What happened? We can't explain this. And I said, Elvis Presley prayed with me. And he said, are you saying that Elvis Presley healed you? And I said, no. God healed me. He just used Elvis as an instrument. And I really believe that because of our faith together.
Anything to do with a spiritual experience is difficult to explain, and Elvis definitely, I think you could say, was a spiritual experience to everybody who ever saw him or touched him or came in contact with him because of that, because he was a much deeper a feeling person than even the people closely around him even had any idea.
Elvis's quest for spiritual growth would lead him down many paths. One that would be with him throughout his life was his devotion to the Eastern discipline of karate.
What do you do for relaxation? You said you study karate. If you can relax doing this, I don't know.
The guy started doing some karate moves and got me interested in that. So immediately I started taking classes in karate, and he said, well, you need to go to Ed Parker, and you need to go to this one, and you need to take Kempo. And he started talking about all these forms of karate, with Shotokan, Kempo, Jiu-Jitsu, and how, very into it he was. And he loved to, he loved to share with people what his personal interests were.
I remember he scared the heck out of my mother once because she saw him try to break a board in half with his head, but he succeeded. And he was a tough guy. His hands were all cut up from the karate when he experienced it, and kept on trying to break boards, but he didn't care because he just had a mission. He was a man on a mission. But he also was extremely well-read, very much into philosophy and spiritual books.
You know, Elvis read books on Eastern religions. Elvis questioned everything. So I think a lot of when I think of Elvis, of this guy that was looking for answers. And you know, when I think like that, most of the people that I know are looking for answers. You know, we're just sort of trying to make it from A to B and trying to get there without hurting anybody and trying to be the best person we can and maybe leave the world a little bit better place than where we found it.
A lot of people don't know he's a well-read man. If he didn't know something, he'd read about it. He'd look it up. He'd find out. Internet today would be an unbelievable thing for him. He'd just find out anything he wants to know. But he started studying world religion.
I noticed that one time he wore a necklace or a neck piece, and one of them had the cross and the other was the Star of David. I understand that when he was a young man and his folks had to go to work, they would leave him with people that were Jewish, and I think he wore the Star of David for them.
Yeah, I think that was a very strong side of Elvis, the spiritual side. And in the house that we built, I had a chapel in that house, and Elvis had bought me a cross to put in that chapel. And he was always amazed that someone's got a little chapel in their home. But he was a very spiritual guy and talked about religion a lot, had all kinds of thoughts about religion, I mean, pro and con. And I guess some of the impact of that is from the little thing he used to wear around his neck. He had a cross, and he had Star of David, and he had, you know, he kind of covered the bases with everything. He didn't want to be left out of heaven on a technicality of any kind.
He loved all religions. He loved the Jewish religion. He used to wear a Jewish star and a cross because he didn't want to get shut out of heaven on a technicality. He used to read the Bible. He'd make up his own things. He would say, God's name is hallowed, because it says here, hallowed be thy name.
In the mid-1960s, Elvis had an experience that would change his outlook on life and his place in it.
Elvis had a classical, spiritual rebirth experience in the Arizona desert. Elvis was driving his mobile home, and I was sitting next to him. And he saw a vision in the clouds, in the sky.
He got out, and it was like in the desert, and there was a cloud formation. I mean, he saw Jesus, and he said that God spoke to him.
It really touched him, and he had this feeling that for the first time he said that I really feel that God's alive, that God is real. I don't have to believe anymore. Now I know God exists. I've been searching my whole life, and I've had a lot of doubts. But now I know God is real. I know it. He just touched my heart.
And he just knew that he was going to do something really big in life, and like bigger than life. But he didn't know what it was. Little did he know that, you know, it was going to be after death and not even in life, that he was going to become this like phenomenon.
He was an artist. He was an entertainer. And he knew who he was. And he said, hey, I'm not a preacher. I was born to make people happy, to entertain people, to sing to them, to do what I can to uplift their lives. That's what I'm all about.
He spoke about God and Jesus Christ in his life, and I thought, wow, here is this wonderful, sensuous performer who gave everything he had and is entertaining, and he's able to sit and talk about God. He said, well, a lot of people have come to think of me kind of like as a god. He said, but I'm not a god. He says, there's only one God. And he said, people worship me, and it's really hard to keep up this image all the time, to be this person that they expect me to be, always perfect. He says, I'm very imperfect. And he says, I'm fighting demons all the time.
Elvis always told us, I'm an entertainer. I don't think I should influence other people, my fans, with the religion or politics. That is something they have to decide on their own. Just because I am a Christian doesn't mean all my fans should be Christian. Same thing as Democrat, Republican. Elvis never said what his politics were about, because he didn't want to influence them. And he felt that's not his job in this world. He's an entertainer. He's there to perform, sing, make people happy, but not get involved in their personal lives.
In 1966, Elvis made the decision to record some of his favorite gospel numbers. The result was the legendary album, How Great Thou Art.
What's interesting is Elvis cut, his greatest gospel album, at the height of 60s radicalism, which was really, when you think about it, a really daring move for Elvis Presley to do that. And that music has endured. That album, is considered one of the great gospel albums today.
I think that's really where his love for music obviously began, but I think that's also where he felt comfortable with the gospel music.
Elvis's favorite music was gospel music. It's music from the heart, because he was such a religious person, and he felt so good when he sang it. And it was so strong and emotional that that was probably his favorite music. And I think he carried that over into all his music, to sing with feeling. Elvis never sang the song twice the same way, because he always, depends how he felt that day and how he put his heart into it. And that's, I think, what made Elvis such a great singer, because he put his heart and soul into every song he ever sang.
Let us pray together, sing together, sing together.
Probably sang gospel music more than any music there was. He sat at piano by himself down in his house at Graceland in the music room, and you could hear him sit there singing gospel music. And I think his whole life was gospel.
Won't you swing down, sweet cherry top, let me ride. Oh, swing, stop and let me ride. Rock me, Lord, come and easy will I got home on the other side.
We grew up with it, from the time I can remember, like 2 years old. When I got old enough, I started to sing in church. And
that's how you got into singing?
Well, it's one of the ways.
One of the ways.
But this thing here, the gospel thing, is really what we grew up with, more than anything else.
He said, Larry, this album is going to do things that we don't even know about. This is God's music. This is spiritual. I'm not going to get out of this seat and open this mouth and use my voice to sing until I know that I'm ready. So why don't we just turn the lights down and let's just meditate. And we did. We meditated for about 30 minutes. And all of a sudden I heard Elvis say, I'm ready. Let's go. We went to the studio. And he sang that first, How Great Thou Art, first take.
How Great Thou Art would go on to win Elvis his first Grammy.
He selected each song, and it took him many months to do it because he knew that this album was going to touch many, many lives because of the nature of it being gospel.
We've got artists now that are nominated for Grammys that get up on stage and insult people and incite riots and offend people racially, ethnically, religiously on every level. And that was not what Elvis was about. People felt good when they went to his concerts. They felt better when they left. And he wasn't about inflaming the passions of people and causing that type of situation to exist.
Though most of those around him were very supportive of his spiritual side, there was at least one person who wasn't happy with Elvis's quest for enlightenment.
If someone spent a lot of time with Elvis, like Larry spent all that time going over all the books and everything, the guys would get jealous. They would get, like one of them in particular, whoa, when's he coming back down? He's been up there for how long? Just really getting all upset because he was spending so much time with Larry Geller. But that's what he wanted to do, and thank God that somebody was there to do something he enjoyed to keep him going.
And I think that this caused a lot of problems in Colonel Parker's mind, in Elvis's life, and myself. And I don't know what he heard, but I know that it really freaked him out. And he called Elvis into a meeting and said, I hear you're on a spiritual kick, and it's not going to last, and you're just dreaming, and it really offended Elvis. And Elvis didn't want to talk to him for a while.
He wanted me to write something for Elvis, that Elvis could do something spiritual, something. And I said, you've got the wrong fellow. I said, I can't write spiritual.
He wanted some kind of a spiritual lyric. I said, I don't write lyrics. That's somebody else. He said, well, no, I don't want it to be lyrics. I just want it to be lyrical, but not lyrics. It's something he can say in the middle of his act. And I said, I'll think about it. Again, he never mentioned that to me after that.
At the very end, Elvis was quite resentful. He appreciated, he recognized the fact that Colonel Parker was a genius. He launched the greatest career in the history of show business. But after a certain point, he lost touch. And he wasn't the man to guide Elvis's career or manage the affairs. Elvis knew it.
What many fans do not know is that Elvis's sense of spiritual purpose extended even to the management of his personal finances. During his lifetime, Presley was the U.S.'s single largest private taxpayer due to the fact that he never took a single deduction and paid the full tax every year. He stated on more than one occasion that he felt that deducting his charitable contributions would negate their value. It wasn't a contribution if you got something back for it.
I happen to know this not through any of Elvis's close friends, because what he did, in many cases, charitable donations in the true sense of charity, the Christian sense of charity that he believed in, was that you give something away and you don't expect anything in return.
This is unique in any lifetime. You know, this person, he wasn't the richest person in the world, but what he had was a great deal by comparison to what most other people had, and he shared it. He shared it for charity. He gave to the top 50 charities in our city of Memphis. He gave to individuals that he knew. He supported law enforcement. He supported church organizations. He supported his family, and he supported his friends in ways that they couldn't do things for themselves.
But it wasn't just money Elvis would donate to his favorite charities. In 1964, he purchased Franklin Roosevelt's presidential yacht, the Potomac, which at that time was in danger of being scrapped. After fixing up the yacht, he then donated it to Danny Thomas's St. Jude's Hospital for Children to be used in a fundraising event for that cause. After serving its purpose, the Potomac went on to become a National Historic Landmark and is now a floating museum. The Potomac wasn't the only part of our national history that Elvis's good nature was responsible for preserving. If one goes to Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, there is a big reminder of Presley's charitable works anchored on what used to be Battleship Row.
At the time, there was no official memorial in Pearl Harbor to honor those who went down with the Arizona. Colonel Parker read about this in Los Angeles. The commission that was trying to complete the project didn't have enough money, and they needed a big fundraiser to finish it off. A lot of people had donated, but they didn't have enough money.
The answer to the problem was simple in Elvis's mind. He would do a benefit show to build the memorial.
And we got a wire back from Elvis saying that he would come to Hawaii and do his first performance here after he was released from the Army. And that's how the Pearl Harbor, Arizona Memorial Benefit Concert came to be.
In 1961, when we did the Arizona, Hawaii show, I'd never seen a crowd like that, of 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 people.
And the Navy had the welcoming committees for us and all, and we were just treated great. And then they put us in the Hawaiian Village Hotel, which was the most beautiful place, I guess, in the world.
We went to Hawaii. The first time that I went with Elvis to Hawaii was 1965 or 66 to film Paradise Hawaiian Style. And the Admiral of the Fleet took Elvis and myself and Joe Esposito and Charlie Hodge and Richard Davis and took us on a tour of Pearl Harbor itself. And the memorial that's there by the Arizona, the ship, the Arizona, that's down, that's Elvis's donation.
Unfortunately, the United States government has seen fit to take a move in recent years that has angered many of those close to Presley during his lifetime.
I'll tell you this, since then I've been to Hawaii several times. And last time I went, we went to go out to the Arizona Memorial, and Elvis's name was not there anymore. And so I asked about it, and I noticed a lot of senators and politicians' names were up there, and I said, well, where's Elvis? And they said, well, they have decided that Elvis had a drug problem, and so they had taken his name down. But Elvis was kind of responsible, I'd say, along with Colonel Tom, for setting this whole thing up. They drew a lot of money for the families of the sailors that went down on the USS Arizona.
One of the problems that Elvis faced in his spiritual quest was that by the mid-1960s, many people saw him as an aging rocker who had sold out his roots to do roustabout. The rest of the world had undergone a transformation which included the study of yoga and other esoteric practices. At the forefront of this movement were the Beatles with their newfound devotion to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and his version of transcendental meditation. To many people, Elvis seemed more and more out of touch with the reality of the times in which he was living. They couldn't have been more wrong.
Self-Realization Center was started by an Indian named Yogananda, and he was the first, I believe, bring Hindu philosophy and yoga techniques to the West. The Lake Shrine is where we would go. It's a very peaceful, beautiful place, and Elvis took me there one day when we got off early, and we spent the afternoon there, went back again several times, but he introduced me to the teachings of Yogananda there and bought me all of Yogananda's books. And then, you know, as we got closer, our relationship turned very spiritual, and Elvis began to share with me things he had learned, books he had read, and so our discussions became very deep and esoteric. We explored, you know, the nature of God, you know, different religions, and I spent a great deal of time. It changed my life.
We were doing a little dental surgery on Elvis. I was taking out an old broken root tip. And of course I reached for the syringe to get him numb, and he says, what's that? I said, well, I'm going to get you numb. He says, well, just give me a moment. He went into sort of like a trance, and at the end of the minute he said, okay, I'm ready. And I reached for the syringe again, and he said, no, he said, that won't be necessary. He had gone into some deep meditation. I said, come on, Elvis. I said, he says, you go ahead. If it bothers me, I'll stop you. I went ahead, did the surgery, got the root tip out, sewed him up. He never blinked, he never moved. And when he finished it, I said, Elvis, I'm through. He says, I never felt a thing. He could put himself into this meditative trance. He was a student of meditation, and he used it.
Towards the end of Elvis's life, he had an extraordinary library. He was a voracious reader. And he was the type of person that when he read a book, he just didn't read and just put it down. He underlined things that were important to him. He made marginal notes, and he would read every day of his life.
Elvis, being the thinker that he was, and the reader that he was, and the human that he was, you know, he wasn't obsessed his whole life about it, but yeah, he did question, and he did search, and he did read, and he did think of past lives, if you will, and he was a very bright man.
In the end, faith was not enough to save Elvis from the pressures of being the best-known man in the world, but his thoughts and actions towards others offer a redemption that he could not find in life.
He said that we don't pay attention, most of us, that we float through life. And I've really noticed this as time has passed on, that most people float, and it's just whatever you call getting by. And he says we have a responsibility for everybody, not just family members, but we really need to think about that. We have a responsibility for everybody.
I mean, there's this whole huge universe. Why us here on this earth? And he always had us looking up in the stars, and we could, I mean, you could see and you could relate, and it really, I even do that now. You know, how could it possibly be? How special are we to be here? He was a very spiritual person and very in tune with God and Jesus. It was very, very close to him. He lived it.
And the reason why, as a fan, somebody is attracted to him, or people are attracted. There are a lot of good-looking guys and gals out there in show business, and there are a lot of talented people out there, but there was only one Elvis.
I think he knew there was something more, but I think when you're in the business, you're never quite satisfied with what it gives, and that's adoration. It's a very physical. There was times when I would cry that nobody loved me for anything but my body. It was what I presented. I think he had a restlessness of an inner peace, and he had so much to give, and I think he was looking for maybe a peace that God might have given him, and I do think he had the Lord in him, but I think it was difficult to find in the circumstances he was in.
Unfortunately, I think he died because that was a time when he started to get shaken and lose the faith. And he was searching desperately in his spiritual books, trying to find it again. He was still reading them, trying to get that faith reignited, but a lot of people let him down.
I went to my room. About 20 minutes later, Elvis calls. I gotta have those books, man. I gotta have those books. You brought me that book about the Holy Shroud of Turin, didn't you? I said, oh yeah, I got it at the Bodhi Tree in Los Angeles. It's a great book. We got the book over to Elvis, and that's the book that Elvis died reading. His body was found on the floor in a fetal position, book clutched to his chest. That's the last thing Elvis ever read.
In his brief lifetime, Elvis touched millions with his music. But to those who knew him, his greatest legacy is not that of the superstar king of rock and roll, but of the Elvis Presley who was simply a human being.
After Elvis passed away, my husband and I were going to church one Sunday, and it was about 6 weeks after he had died. I was just thinking about all the things we had done and the fun we'd had and things like that. And so on the way home from church, I told Bob, I said, pull in at Walgreens. I want to pick up a notebook. And so we did, and I got me a notebook, and he said, what are you going to do with that? And I said, well, you know, honey, I think I want to put down all I can remember about Elvis. I said, because someday I'm going to be too old to remember, and I want to be able to go back and remember him.
You still think about Elvis. I do. And I thought he was one of the nicest guys that I'd ever met in my life.
There's not really, and I mean this in no disrespect, but there's not really another person. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, the Indian Times did an article on me just because I was a friend of Elvis Presley, you know, which is amazing. I'm very proud to be a friend of Elvis Presley.
I hope that somewhere along the line as we go down through history that the things that will not be missed about Elvis. He was more than a musician. He was more than a singer. He was more than an entertainer. He was also a man of great spirituality, great character, great capacity to love, great capacity to share, and great capacity to contribute. All of those, and that's why when the time came, an opportunity for me to do so, I named, as the mayor, I named the hospital, Elvis Presley Trauma Center, the place where people go with the greatest amount of hurt. And I thought, what better example could we have than to name it after Elvis, because there, that hurt can be dealt with.
Elvis brought a touch of magic into our lives, is the way we put it. And when he passed away, and I told my wife, I said, you know, I said, the magic will now be gone. But here it is, 20-some odd years later, and it's still there.
I remember his voice sounded very pure. We started laughing to one another on the phone, and so my thoughts prior, you know, how he looked and what was going on kind of evaporated. I let it go, because he sounded really good. He said, well, you know, okay, all right, well, I'll see you tomorrow, but don't forget now. This is the last thing he ever said to me. He said, don't forget, Larry, angels fly because they take themselves so lightly. We both laughed.